Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast for 12th October 2023. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan, based in Montreal. Just actually, though, Mark, fresh back from a few days of meetings in New York, had a number of clients that were in town, and just enjoying the opportunity to visit that amazing metropolis. It's always quite refreshing when you go south of the border from Canada and you can compare and contrast the similarities and differences, but certainly glad to be back here on the CX Files this week. Really excited about the interview that we're going to feature today with Diane Edwards.
Well, I know that you talked to Diane, and so this week we'll have a Jamaica theme, won't it?
Yeah, it's a Jamaica theme, but I think it's important to realize as well that the Jamaica theme that we're going to be discussing, certainly I think is a topic that's going to probably resonate with a lot of individuals, whether they be in the European Union, whether they be in certain parts of the United States, or anywhere in the world that is looking to try and incorporate new compliance rules into how BPO and CX is delivered. Now, as a bit of a backgrounder, Mark, many people in the BPO community will remember that Diane Edwards, for a number of years, very successfully quarterbacked the JAMPRO organization. Now, this is effectively the government body that champions investment into Jamaica and did an absolutely outstanding job. Now, Diane has left that role, and now she is the director of consulting at the Mona School of Business in Kingston, Jamaica. Now, she, in her role, has taken on a bit of an ambassadorship or perhaps a thought leadership position as it comes to the Jamaican Data Protection Act, which is going to be coming into force at the end of this year. And Diane and I discuss a little bit about the background of the Act, a little bit about some of the similarities that it has in relation to GDPR, and the impact of organizations in the CX and the BPO community that aren't necessarily going to be in compliance with the Act when the timeframe set in, and what some of the consequences that might be. Diane certainly did indicate during the course of the interview that it's so important for any organization in the outsourcing world or otherwise that's acting in Jamaica needing to be compliant. And she indicated as well that really the time is ticking down. So a fascinating chat. And as you know from the work that you've done in different parts of the world, compliance is not the kind of thing that you can ignore. You've got to get ahead of it. You've got to get familiar with what some of the terms are. And I used the comparison in the chat with Diane that we had just a couple of weeks ago about some of the reminiscences I had of several years back when GDPR was coming into full force. And there were so many organizations in the BPO sector that just did not get ahead of it, that waited to the very last minute. And those are the companies that really are the ones that are going to be suffering the consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. And with GDPR, which was about 5 years ago, I think now, that
Yep.
there was about a 2-year phase-in period where the rules were applicable, but they were not being enforced. But even so, in the last couple of months before the enforcement started, you could see people desperately kind of trying to review the data they have on customers. So I think that, if we're now in October and talking about new rules that are going to be enforced from December 1st, then anybody with any kind of involvement in nearshore, kind of Caribbean BPO definitely needs to be aware of this.
They do. And Diane was emphatic about this. And what I think was really important, and I would encourage anybody listening to the pod today that is working in Jamaica that perhaps might not necessarily be where they need to be when it comes to this element of managing the new Jamaican Data Protection Act that's coming into vigor at the end of this year. Diane's given some great ideas on where they can find more information, who they need to speak to, what they can do in order to make sure that they're 100% watertight. And again, strongly counsel any executive, anyone who's got questions about it, to look to these resources, inform themselves as much as possible, and act as soon as they possibly can.
Okay, so why don't we go straight to the interview today with Diane Edwards?
The CX Files this week welcomes a longtime friend of mine, but I believe somebody that we haven't had the pleasure of bringing onto the podcast just as of yet, and that is Diane Edwards, who joins us from her office in Kingston, Jamaica. Diane, great to see you.
Great to see you, Peter. It's been a while.
It has been a while. I like to think I'm like something that's like wine. I just get better with age, and although some people might say I've What's that?
Lots of us like to claim that.
Exactly. But in my case, I don't get better with age. I just turn to vinegar.
Well, you know the word in French, of course, you're francophone as well. So you're bilingual. So vin aigre was essentially that. It was the wine turning into what became vinegar. So hey.
Exactly. Albeit I like to think I'm a very rarefied vinegar, but I don't know. I guess that depends. That depends on the palate. Now, Diane, most people will be very aware of the role that you played for quite some time as the head of JAMPRO, the investment promotion arm of the Jamaican government. And that's how you and I got to know each other with the work that I was doing in the CX and the BPO space. But maybe to kick off our discussion today, could you talk a little bit about the role that you've evolved into and what you're up to these days?
Sure. I've been actually 8 months at the University of the West Indies Business School, which is called Mona School of Business and Management. And for me, it's been a great segue into kind of from really hands-on doing stuff with JAMPRO and, of course, working very heavily with the BPO industry to really taking a step back and now thinking about things. So I'm doing consultancy and building a consultancy for the business school. You know, many business schools have consultancies. So we're doing management consultancy on the one hand and executive education and short courses on the other hand. And there's a great synergy between the two of them because what we're really trying to do is improve the efficiency and the performance of business in Jamaica. So I'm kind of doing something similar, but from a different angle, different perspective. But my clients are a lot of the people that I used to talk to at JAMPRO. So that's a great segue.
That's very cool. And I've got to ask you, what's it like being able to segue from that quasi-government atmosphere into an academic atmosphere? I've always been curious about how people have found the transition into more of an academic setting.
Yeah, it is different, but it's kind of a whole whirlwind of ideas coming at you. And that's what's so exciting about the university. It really is this febrile melting pot of everyone thinking about all sorts of different things, doing a lot of research, doing a lot of prescription and how does this work? How does that work? How can we make that better? And so that's the kind of mindset I'm in. And I'm really enjoying it because rather than being, a little bit hemmed in, I guess, by government and the public sector and its regulations and all that, now we're kind of really free to think. And I have a much smaller team. But we're very tight and we're very active and we can branch off in lots of different directions. And you know me, I've always been one with too many ideas. That's my problem.
It's better to have too many ideas than not enough. And I think that you're in an ideal location in which to be able to explore some of those ideas, have access to people who are going to be creative, as you say, maybe aren't as constrained by legislative or regulatory elements around a government agency. So congratulations on the role, Diane, and we wish you well. But today we're here to talk about a very interesting issue that the way it came to my attention was a post you'd put on LinkedIn a few weeks back, and that was with regards to the imminent, I guess you could say, enactment of the Jamaica Data Protection Act. So could you start maybe by describing exactly what this Data Protection Act actually is, and maybe give us a sense about how it compares with other initiatives we've seen in different parts of the world?
Sure. Yeah, well, we're in a kind of a panic mode in Jamaica right now, actually. People tend to do crisis management, especially when they don't want to deal with certain things. And this Data Protection Act has been a long time in the making. The act was actually passed in June 2020, but it takes effect only on December 1, 2023. So that's in 2 months' time. So really, companies have been a little bit dilatory in not getting to grips with what does this mean? What are the implications for us? So the Jamaican Data Protection Act is really largely modeled on the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU. And it really governs how do you collect the data, how do you store data, and this is personal data, obviously. How do you process data? How do you how long do you keep it for? How do you erase it? Is it erased forever? All these kinds of questions around data and management of data. So our act, very similar to GDPR, but there are some important differences, particularly that what we have done is set up an office of the Information Commissioner. And that office really requires a register of a data controller and a data protection officer. So every company in Jamaica has to appoint a data protection officer. So the company is a data controller and the DPO is the person who is actually going to be responsible for that management and storage of data. And it's a big responsibility because, you know, people are more and more concerned with how their data is managed and what people do with their data, their personal data. And so all kinds of companies now, and BPO companies are not at all exempt, are having to get to grips with this whole question of how do we manage the data. So it is a very new area, and part of the challenge is that some of the framework infrastructure is not really ready. So the Office of the Information Commissioner in Jamaica is just kind of getting itself set up. So come December 1, however, if you're not registered or you haven't taken steps to get registered, you are potentially liable for some serious penalties.
Okay, so, now that raises a lot of very, very interesting points, Diane. And let's talk a little bit about it from the BPO community's perspective. Now, obviously, you've had a tremendous amount of exposure to the outsourcing community. You've been responsible for attracting some of the most important names in the world to Jamaica. From your perspective, in the role that you're in right now, what will be maybe the 2 to 3 most important impacts of the Jamaican Data Protection Act on the outsourcing and the customer experience community, in your opinion?
Well, I think BPOs need to take it really seriously in the sense that there's one of the big drivers behind us passing this act was that the EU won't do business with countries that don't have an act and that don't take data and data privacy very seriously. So I think the big positive for the BPO industry is that we are taking it seriously. Now, it does, however, put a lot of responsibility on the companies to make sure that they have proper processes. So this can't be just a hit or miss and yeah, we have these lists and yeah, we're managing people's data and we know all this healthcare stuff about people in another country. Now you have to be very clear about the processes, the procedures, the data privacy. You see, a lot of BPO companies have looked at data security. How can we secure our data from other people getting hold of it? But now we're looking at it from a different perspective, which is how can we protect the privacy of people's data and not become as intrusive as we used to be. So I used to get calls all the time in London from people who got my name clearly from a list. You know, if you subscribe to The Economist, then the FT is going to call you and say, do you want a subscription to the Financial Times? Well, now you got to be much more careful with that sort of outbound stuff because people now need to opt in. So how do you manage that data? And how do you ensure that you're not abusing people's data and selling their information? You see, so all of this now becomes a much more deliberate, focused activity, and processes have to be clear.
Yeah. And, you know, I think about it from the perspective of a country like Jamaica, which I think we can all agree has become a major hotspot for customer experience management. And the amount of data and information that's collected that's that's being effectively, I guess you could say, harvested by Jamaican agents has got to be huge. So the implications, no matter if you're a local player or an international player operating within Jamaica, the magnitude of this is really something that I'm just starting to comprehend. So I could just imagine if an organization's head of compliance has been thinking about this for a couple of years now.
Absolutely. You know, we started earlier this year running courses for data protection officers through the Mona School of Business. And we've had a huge take up because I think a lot of companies are just starting to think, oh my God, December 1 is around the corner. Now, of course, the bigger companies, you know, they have CIOs and they've got rafts of people and departments, and they can research through their legal department, etc. But when you're an SME and you're a small market research company, or you're a small marketing company, and you are managing people's data, you know, you really have to come to terms with this. So we've trained now, I think we've graduated 2 cohorts of about 40 people. So we're really on the way to getting to terms with this, but I haven't seen that much activity in the BPO industry here, quite interestingly. So I don't know if they're not thinking about it, or they're getting trained outside of Jamaica, or what they're doing, but it's an interesting question that I really should do some research on. So thanks
I
for
just
raising it. That's a great tip from you, Keith.
Hey, well, I tell you, that's what we're here for at the CX Files. I just have had this impression of people, maybe, you know, like when we were all little kids and we didn't want to listen to what the parents were telling us about eating our vegetables because they'd be good for us. We put our fingers in our ear and start singing. That might very well be what some BPO operators are doing right now. I hope it's not the case, but you know, Diane, you raised a really interesting point about how when you were living in London and you would get telephone calls, people would be able to take your name off of a list. We've all had that in the past, and it's all been incredibly annoying. Luckily, for the most part, that's gone away. I do find that email spam or cold emails is starting to pick up again, which I personally don't like. And I don't know how people think that they can email me telling me that my carpets need cleaning and they'd be happy to come over and take care of it, especially considering I've got hardwood floors. But again, you know, I guess any port in a storm. But thinking a little bit about it from the CX operators in Jamaica, in your opinion, what are going to be the benefits of this act for the BPO players and for their clients? And do you see any potential downsides in terms of the implementation or once the laws actually have been implemented?
Well, you know, I think companies need to embrace some of this legislation, which a priori might seem really bothersome, because I think from Jamaica's point of view, I think it's a competitive benefit. So, as I said, the EU won't do business with companies with countries if the countries don't show that they respect data and take data privacy seriously. So the fact that Jamaica does is important from that point of view. And actually, we have a couple of European companies doing business here who are very, very aware of this, because they wouldn't really be able to do business here if we didn't have this legislation. So I think from that point of view, it's important. From a CX point of view, I think clarity and transparency for clients is important. Customers need to know that their data is being respected and treated properly. And I think in a world where the consumer is becoming more and more savvy and more research oriented, you know, reading labels, reading about companies, what's their green footprint look like? You know, are they gender, do they respect gender equality? All sorts of questions now, CSR questions, which are now current. And I think data protection is going to be put into that whole corporate social responsibility bucket, you know. So if you're not respectful of my data, I'm not going to give you data. So some of or big online people like Facebook are going to face this kind of issue. Because people are now, I think, aware that, my data is actually valuable. So I'm not just going to give it away for nothing. So I think building trust with clients is really critical to developing a company's brand now. So I think that's the upside of it. The downside of it is, yes, it's going to take time. It's going to maybe be a cost. You're going to have to set up and really research and define processes that maybe you weren't thinking about doing, or maybe you just did it on automatic pilot. Now you're going to have to get real about it. And you're going to have to designate someone who will have to get trained to understand the ramifications of the act. So all of that means a bit more structure, a bit more training, a bit more implementation, and the process is being clarified. So I guess for some, that is going to be onerous. And as I said, time and cost is always a consideration. But I think in the end, it's going to be positive.
And that raises a really, really interesting point, because you alluded to this earlier, that some of the larger organizations that are perhaps more global, international, will have the resources to manage this. They'll have the legal teams on staff, or they can potentially hire legal offices or law firms to come and help them out with this. If I'm a smaller Jamaican-owned operator, this could be onerous, at least in the near to medium term.
It could be onerous, or it could be a business opportunity.
That too, and
I'm giving you that for free.
I love it. I love it. That's fantastic. So then let's talk a little bit about the implementation period and the getting used to it. It's like, buying a new pair of gloves. It takes a few days for them to really start fitting in. I know you don't buy gloves in Jamaica that much. Unfortunately, us in Canada, we don't have that luxury. Exactly. Exactly. So then, Diane, let me ask you, from the standpoint of your opinion, as you know the CX sector and the BPO space, to what extent do you think customer service delivery from Jamaica is going to be impacted by this new set of laws, either in the near, the medium, or the longer term?
Well, I think it's going to make our companies more sophisticated. I think America doesn't have an equivalent of the GDPR that's federal. So, right. California has something, and I'm not sure if any other state actually has anything as detailed as what California has. So the US companies, and a lot of them are here, are probably not as aware of some of these implications as the European companies are, and they've had to be. But I think that the American companies are going to get caught up, and I think that the world is going to get caught up to this whole management of data and value of data proposition, because I think it's where we have to go. And that will affect some people's business models, yes. If you have a business model that's based on trading in people's data without their permission, you may have to rethink that, because I think the permission question will become paramount. You're not going to be able to continue to just use people's data for free, as consumers become more vigilant and more aware. And I think the Jamaican consumer, who is not as aware as the average consumer in the US, for instance, will become more aware.
I don't think there's any question about it. And I cannot believe the extent, and this is just anecdotal, but the extent to which people I know are so aware and, quite frankly, so rightly protective of their personal information. And it's very frightening when you think about the nefarious nature of how personal information is being traded, whether it's using legitimate or quasi-legitimate means, or even through hacks on the dark web. And we had another serious situation in Canada where the government's immigration, I don't know if it's the immigration, but effectively the databases or the IT operations at the Montreal airport that process people coming in from the country was hacked over the weekend. And wow. I could just imagine, as somebody who's going through the Montreal Customs Department quite frequently, I'm worried Where's my information going? What's happening to it? And then when you take into account all the legitimate means of potentially trading on information for jurisdictions that don't have laws like the one that Jamaica is bringing in, it kind of beggars the imagination, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's pretty scary because especially in a world of chatbots, chat GPT, AI, your data now can be used for all kinds of things. I mean, you could be having my head here and I could be saying stuff that I'm not really saying. And that's what's scary about it. So because we're accustomed to an open source internet, and it's everything is free and it's open, and we've got TikTok and all kinds of stuff is going on. But when you look at the power of AI and what it can do, and then you marry that with large scale data, personal data, it is pretty scary. And then especially if you look at healthcare data, you look at financial data, then you're in another whole ballgame. So I think the legislators are having a really hard time trying to catch up with this whole question. And it's an interesting dichotomy in Jamaica right now because we're about to bring in a national ID card system, which Anglo-Saxon countries have shied away from. But European countries all have ID cards. So people are saying, oh, well, I don't want to share all this data with the government, but it's on Facebook. You shared your data on Facebook. You have your address, you have your phone number, and if it's not Facebook, it's Instagram, it's TikTok, or wherever it is you hang out online. Most of these companies have most of your data.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Scared about the government having it when private companies have it, and they're using it,
So last question, Diane, and thank you very much. This has been incredibly informative, and I think you've given some fantastic guidance in terms of what the act means, what the implications are going to be. So if I'm a BPO, if I'm one of these laggard BPOs that's got my fingers in my ears and I'm singing, and I've decided December the 1st is literally just 2 months and a few days away, and I want to inform myself more about what the implications on my business are going to be for the Jamaica Data Protection Act. What should I do? Where should I go? Who should I be speaking with?
Well, right now, you really should download the act, which you can download from japarliament.gov.jm. So that's the Jamaican Parliament's address. And you can Google it, you can find it. You can also come to a course. This is shameless plug, because at Mona School of Business and Management, we have data protection courses, which we are running. They're just 24-hour courses, and we have a new cohort starting on December 18th, so it's easy to sign up. And other than that, you can actually hire a lawyer or ask your local legal counsel to do some research on it and to help you to set up your data protection office and designate your data protection officer, because that's a critical thing you have to do. Designate this person and get this person registered at the Office of the Information Commissioner. And you definitely have to reach out to her before December 1. So she's named, she's a woman called Celia Barkley. She's a lawyer. She's very competent, knows her stuff. All this is online. So I would just get into action and do some research and figure it out. And if you can't figure it out, call me.
I love it. Well, it's like carpe diem, seize the day. And I think that that's fantastic advice, great counsel. Diane Edwards, great to see you. Thank you so much for your first, but certainly not your last appearance on the CX Files. It's been great to catch up with you, and we look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Great, Peter. Come to Jamaica anytime. It will be great to see you again. And thanks for having me. I enjoyed this.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.